Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another exciting meeting of the Indu Committee while we continue our legislative review of the Copyright Act. Today we have with us from Tech Savvy Solutions, Andy Kaplan-Murth, Vice President, Regulatory and Carrier Affairs. Welcome. We have from BCE, Robert Malcolmson, Senior Vice President, Regulatory Affairs, and Mark Graham, Senior Legal Counsel. We have from Rogers Communications, David Watt, Senior Vice President, Regulatory, and we have Christina Milbourne, Director, Copyright and Broadband. And finally, from Shaw Communications, we have Cynthia Rathwell, Vice President, Legislative and Policy Strategy, along with, it's not on our list, but Jay Kerr-Wilson, Legal Counsel, Faskin. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Each group will have up to 7 minutes to make their presentation, and then afterwards we will get into our rounds of question. So we're going to get started right away with Tech Savvy Solutions. Mr. Kaplan-Murth, you have up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Andy Kaplan-Murth. I'm VP Regulatory and Carrier Affairs at Tech Savvy, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective and experience with the Copyright Act. Tech Savvy is an independent Canadian internet and phone services provider based in southwestern Ontario and Gatineau. We've been serving customers for 20 years, and we now provide service to over 300,000 customers in every province. Over the years, we've consistently defended network neutrality and protected our customers' privacy rights, both in the context of copyright and in other contexts. Tech Savvy is different from the other witnesses today in two important ways for the purposes of this review. First, while we take copyright infringement very seriously, we do not own media content that's broadcasted or distributed. We're appearing here as an internet service provider and not as a content provider or a rights holder. Second, to provide services to most of our end users, we build out our networks to a certain extent, and then we cover the last mile to reach homes and businesses using wholesale services that we buy from carriers. Because of that wholesale services layer, sometimes things work very differently for us than they do for the incumbent ISPs. I'm going to focus my comments today on two areas: notice and notice, and our concerns with the way that it currently works, and our opposition to proposals to block websites to enforce copyright. I'll turn first to the notice and notice regime. When notice and notice first came into effect, Tech Savvy expended significant resources to develop systems to receive and process notices. Maintaining those systems and hiring staff to process notices continues to be a challenge for a small ISP like Tech Savvy. I'll get to our concerns, but I want to start by noting that, in principle at least, notice and notice is a reasonable policy approach to copyright infringement that balances the interests of rights holders and end users. At the same time, now that it's been in place for 4 years, nearly, we can see that notice and notice needs some adjustments. We would recommend 3 tweaks to the current notice and notice regime. First, a standard is needed to allow ISPs to process notices automatically in a way that's consistent with Canadian law. On average, we receive thousands of infringement notices per week from dozens of companies using scores of different templates, less than half of which can be processed automatically. In effect, notice forwarding is an expensive and difficult service that we provide to rights holders at no cost, and for which we're expected to provide a 100% service level. That's not sustainable. Infringement notices are emails that generally have a block of plain text followed by a block of code. Some senders use notices with a block of code that follows a Canadian standard that contains all the elements of the Copyright Act that allow us to forward those notices. If it has the code that follows the Canadian standard, those notices can be processed automatically without a human needing to actually open the notice and read it to review the content. But many notices use code that's adapted from American copyright notices that don't include everything that we require in the Canadian Copyright Act. Others are in plain text only. They have no code. When that happens, a human needs to actually read the text of the notice to confirm whether it contains the content that's required before we can forward it. Both of those notices have to be processed manually. That's work-intensive and slow, and realistically, it is not sustainable as volumes increase. If rights holders were required to use a Canadian notice standard, ISPs would be able to automatically process their notices and better handle high notice volume. Second, a fee should be established that ISPs could charge to process notices. Currently, there's essentially no cost for rights holders to send infringement notices. As long as they can send in notices at no cost, then even if they only get settlements from a small number of end users, there will be a business model for rights holders to send greater and greater volumes of notices. Rather, ISPs bear the cost for processing those notices and then answering many customer questions that they generate. Even a small fee would help to transfer the cost back from ISPs to rights holders and constrain the volumes of notices. We already get thousands of notices per week. I expect larger ISPs get far more. I'm not suggesting that we need to reduce those numbers necessarily, but we need to create some economic pressure to prevent them from ballooning indefinitely. The Copyright Act already contemplates that a fee could be established, and we recommend that a fee should be established to protect ISPs and end users from being flooded with unlimited numbers of notices. Third, infringement notices should not be able to contain extraneous content. Many infringement notices contain content that is intimidating to end users or can violate customer privacy. In some cases, they don't reference Canadian law at all. Some notices include content that's more familiar from scams and spam, advertising for other services, settlement offers, or personalized links that secretly reveal information about the end user to the sender. This puts ISPs in a difficult position, since we're required to forward notices to end users, including whatever extraneous, misleading, or harmful content may be included. This does not serve the purposes of the notice and notice regime, and we recommend that the content or form of notices should be prescribed so they can only contain the elements they are required to contain. Finally, turning briefly to site blocking. Earlier this year, a group of media companies proposed a new site blocking regime to the CRTC aimed at policing copyright infringement. TechSavvy opposed that proposal at the CRTC, and we would oppose any similar proposal here. Simply put, such site blocking would be a violation of common carriage and network neutrality without being especially effective, all without any real urgent justification. TechSavvy strongly encourages you to oppose any such site blocking proposals. Thank you, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're going to move to BCE. Mr. Malcolmson, you have up to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members. As you've heard, my name is Robert Malcolmson, Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at BCE. With me today is my colleague Mark Graham, Senior Counsel, Legal and Regulatory at BCE. And we appreciate your invitation to provide Bell's views on how to maximize the benefits to Canadians and our economy through the review of the Copyright Act. Bell is Canada's largest communications company, employing 51,000 Canadians and investing $4 billion per year in advanced networks and media content. These investments allow us to provide advanced communication services that form the backbone of Canada's digital economy. We are also a key supporter of Canada's cultural and democratic system, investing approximately $900 million per year in Canadian content and operating the largest networks of both TV and local radio stations in the country. I think we bring a unique and balanced perspective to the issues you are considering. As a content creator and major economic partner with Canada's creative community, we understand the importance of copyright and effective remedies to combat piracy. As an internet intermediary, we also understand the need for balanced rules that do not unduly impede legitimate innovation. I look forward to sharing this perspective with you today. First, beginning with piracy. There is an emerging consensus among creators, copyright owners, and legitimate commercial users and intermediaries that large-scale and often commercially motivated piracy operations are a growing problem in Canada. Piracy sites now regularly reach up to 15.3% of Canadian households through widely available and easy-to-use illegal set-top boxes. This is up from effectively 0 5 years ago. In addition, there were 2.5 billion visits to piracy sites to access stolen TV content last year. And 1 in every 3 Canadians obtained music illegally in 2016. Each of these measures has grown significantly over time. According to recent research conducted for ISED and Heritage, 26% of Canadians self-report as accessing pirated content online. TV piracy in Canada has an estimated economic impact in the range of $500 to $650 million annually. In light of these concerning trends, we believe the most urgent task facing the committee in this review is to modernize the Act and related enforcement measures to meet the challenges posed by global internet piracy without unduly burdening legal businesses. To be clear, this does not mean targeting individual Canadians who are accessing infringing material. Rather, it means addressing the operators of commercial-scale copyright infringing services. It is these large infringing operations that harm the cultural industries that employ more than 600,000 Canadians, account for approximately 3% of our GDP, and tell the uniquely Canadian stories that contribute to our shared cultural identity. With this in mind, we have 4 recommendations. First, modernize the existing criminal provisions in the Act. Criminal penalties for organized copyright crime are an effective deterrent that do not impact individual users or interfere with legitimate innovation. Section 42 of the Copyright Act already contains criminal provisions for content theft undertaken for commercial purposes, but they have grown outdated. They deal with illegal copying, while modern formats of content theft rely on streaming. These provisions should be made technologically neutral so that they apply equally to all forms of commercial-scale content theft. Second, increase public enforcement of copyright. In jurisdictions such as the UK and the United States, law enforcement and other public officials are actively involved in enforcement action against the worst offenders. The committee should recommend that the government create and consider enshrining in the Act an administrative enforcement office and that it direct the RCMP to prioritize digital piracy investigations. Third, maintain the existing exemptions from liability related to the provision of networks and services in the digital economy. These exemptions protect service innovation without diluting the value of copyright. Fourth and finally, consider a new provision that specifically empowers courts to order intermediaries to contribute to remedying infringements. This would apply to intermediaries such as ISPs, web hosts, domain name registrars, search engines, payments processors, and advertising networks. In practice, this would mean that a new section in the Copyright Act would allow a court to issue an order directly to, for example, a web host to take down an egregious piracy site, a search engine to delist it, a payment processor to stop collecting money for it, or a registrar to revoke its domain. While financial liability for these intermediaries is not appropriate, they can and should be expected to take these reasonable steps to contribute to protecting the value of copyright that is essential to a modern digital and creative economy. Thank you for the opportunity to present our views, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Rogers Communication. Mr. Watt, you have up to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is David Watt, and I am Senior Vice President Regulatory at Rogers Communications. I'm here today with Christina Milburn, to my left, Director of Copyright and Broadband at Rogers. We appreciate the opportunity to share our views with you today. Rogers is a diversified Canadian communications and media company offering wireless, high-speed internet, cable television, radio, and television broadcasting. We support a Copyright Act that takes a balanced approach to the interests of rights holders, users, and intermediaries, thereby optimizing the growth of digital services and investments in both innovation and content. As a member of both the Canadian Association of Broadcasters and the Business Coalition for Balanced Copyright, we support their comments in this review. When we appeared before this committee 5 years ago, we defended the notice regime as a useful deterrent to copyright infringement occurring through the downloading of movies using BitTorrent protocols. Since then, Canadians have fundamentally changed the way they obtain and view stolen content. November 2017 survey commissioned by ISED and Heritage Canada found that Canadians are increasingly using streaming to view stolen content online. Sandvine, a Canadian company that conducts network analytics, reported that in 2017, roughly 15% of Canadian households were streaming stolen content using preloaded set-top boxes. These boxes access an IP address that provides the stream. While illegal downloading remains a major problem for rights holders, illegal streaming has become the primary vehicle by which thieves make the stolen content available. We need new tools in the Act to combat this new threat to the rights holders and to our Canadian broadcasting system. We have watched the rise of streaming stolen content with deepening concern. We've taken action using the existing remedies under the Act, but these remedies are insufficient. We need new tools in the Act to combat this new streaming threat. We recommend 2 amendments to the Act that will make a difference. First, the Act should make it a criminal violation for a commercial operation to profit from the theft and making available of exclusive and copyrighted content on streaming services. In our experience, the existing civil prohibitions are not strong enough to deter this type of content theft. Second, the Act should allow for injunctive relief against all of the intermediaries that form part of the online infrastructure distributing stolen content. For example, a blocking order against an ISP requiring an ISP to disable access to stolen content available on preloaded set-top boxes. This would be similar to action taken in over 40 countries, including jurisdictions such as the UK and Australia. The Fair Play Coalition, of which Rogers is a participant, asked for this in its application to the CRTC filed earlier this year. This injunctive relief would serve to support and supplement that application. In addition to these amendments addressing illegal streaming, we also have recommendations for improving the notice and notice regime. These proposals would protect Canadians against settlement demands and copyright trolling. First, we fully support the government's position that future copyright notices must exclude settlement demands. We recommend that notice and notice provisions be amended to prohibit rights holders from making settlement demands in notices. We also recommend that the government prescribe by regulation the form and content of legitimate notices that an ISP would have to process under the Act. A prescribed web form would prevent improper information from being entered into the notice. Secondly, and with reference to the case recently determined by the Supreme Court of Canada regarding reasonable costs of an order to disclose information, or Norwich order, this is the subsequent step after a notice and notice form has been sent out for those people who wish to pursue further action. The minister should set a rate per lookup and attach it as a schedule to regulations made under the Act. Based on Rogers costs, a rate of $100 per IP address would be appropriate. This approach would provide transparency to all those involved in Norwich order requests. These are our brief comments, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And finally, we're going to go to Shaw Communications. Ms. Rathwell.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Cynthia Rathwell, Vice President, Legislative and Policy Strategy at Shaw Communications. With me today is Jay Kerr-Wilson, a partner at Fasken, whose expertise is copyright law. We appreciate the opportunity to present Shaw's view on this review of the Copyright Act. Shaw is a leading Canadian connectivity company that provides 7 million Canadians with services that include cable and satellite television, high-speed internet, home phone services, and through Freedom Mobile wireless voice and data services. Shaw expected to invest over $1.3 billion in fiscal 2018 to build powerful converged networks and bring leading-edge telecommunications and broadcasting distribution services to Canadians. Annually, as a content distributor, we pay tens of millions of dollars in royalties pursuant to Copyright Board-approved tariffs. over 95 million in regulated Canadian programming contributions, and approximately 800 million in programming affiliation payments, 675 million of which is paid to Canadian programming services with Canadian content predominantly. Accordingly, Shaw understands and wishes to emphasize the importance of a copyright regime that balances the rights and interests of each component of the copyright ecosystem. This balance is central to Canada's interest in maintaining a vibrant digital economy. Overall, our Copyright Act already strikes an effective balance, subject to a few provisions that would benefit from targeted amendments. Extensive changes are neither necessary nor in the public interest. They would upset Canada's carefully balanced regime and jeopardize policy objectives of other acts of Parliament that coexist with copyright as part of a broader framework that includes the Broadcasting Act and the Telecommunications Act. Proposals to increase the scope and or duration of existing rights, introduce new entitlements, or narrow the scope of existing exceptions would increase the cost of digital products and services for Canadians, undermine investment, innovation, and network efficiency, and impact Canadians' participation in the digital economy. Stakeholders who argue for new entitlements or limitations appear to seek a simplified response to global market developments that are impacting the production, distribution, consumption, and valuation of not only copyright works, but of goods and services provided by many, if not most, industries. The responses of most businesses, including Shaw, to market disruptions have been to invest and to innovate, diversify, and improve the quality of service and customer experience in order to compete. Fundamental changes in the digital marketplace cannot simply be offset by new legislative entitlements or protections. Calls for new rights appear in part to be based on the suggestion that copyright is a tool for the promotion of cultural content. The Copyright Act is concerned with promoting efficient markets and to support the creation of works, but generally without regard to a creator's nationality or where the work was created. As a result, attempts to use copyright as a cultural policy instrument would undermine the achievement of domestic cultural policy objectives established by other statutes. A clear example of this is the Border Broadcasters Inc.'s proposal for retransmission consent rights for broadcasters, which it argues would support the production of local programming. Shaw is strongly opposed to that proposal. If adopted, it would disrupt carefully calibrated Canadian copyright and broadcasting policy. It would require Canadians to pay billions of dollars per year in new fees for the same services, a large part of which would flow to the U.S., while creating the potential for loss of access to programming and service disruptions. These impacts would undermine the competitiveness of Canada's broadcasting industry, incenting subscribers to turn away from the Canadian broadcasting system, ultimately at the expense of the Broadcasting Act's objectives. Canada's Copyright Act provides that services related to the operation of the Internet are exempted from copyright liability solely in connection with providing network services. It also provides that those furnishing digital storage space are exempt from liability in connection with hosted content. As an Internet service provider, Shaw strongly submits that these exceptions should be maintained. ISPs benefiting from the network services exception are subject to obligations under the notice and notice regime, and protection is denied where a network is found to be enabling infringement. Furthermore, the hosting exception is not available with respect to materials which the host knows to infringe copyright. As such, Canadian law strikes the correct balance between incenting investment in network services and ensuring that these services support the integrity of copyright. Some stakeholders have also called for a narrowing or removal of existing exceptions, such as the technological processes exception, that enable end users and service providers to employ innovative and efficient technologies to facilitate the authorized use of works. Shaw strongly believes that these exceptions represent a balanced approach that maximizes Canada's participation in the digital economy. While Shaw believes that the Copyright Act overall is well balanced, minor changes should be made to the notice and notice framework to curtail abuses, such as regulations mandating that notices be transmitted to ISPs electronically and in a prescribed form. It's been discussed today already in detail. As well, Shaw submits that new measures are needed to enable creators to enforce rights against commercial-level online piracy. This will help ensure that rights holders receive fair remuneration and that networks are protected from malicious malware frequently associated with piracy sites. We therefore support an amendment to the Copyright Act's civil remedies to clarify the federal court's authority to order ISPs to block access to websites found to be infringing. In conclusion, Canada's Copyright Act achieves an appropriate and thoughtful balance between creator, user, and intermediary interests, subject to the minor amendments that we've recommended. The extensive changes requested by various stakeholders would disrupt the achievement of policy objectives pursuant to the overall legislative framework governing copyright broadcasting and telecommunications. Thanks very much. We look forward to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're going to move right into our line of questioning with, we'll be starting with Mr. Graham. You have up to 7 minutes.
I'll take them all, thank you. First off, Mr. Kaplan-Murthy, I'd like to ask if you could send to us some of the letters, some of these notices that you received in the different formats, so we can just get a taste of what kind of stuff comes into you. Just a simple request if you could send it to the clerk in the future.
I'd be happy to send some version of them. Of course, they contain
private.
personal information of end
Understood.
users, so we would sort of clean out the content if that were okay with you and show you the variety of different sort of notices that we get.
I'd appreciate that. For Bell and for Rogers, I'm just going to confirm for the record that you are members of Fair Play Canada. You support Fair Play Canada?
Yes for Bell.
And yes for Rogers.
Could either of you explain to me why the website is registered in Panama and hosted in the U.S.?
The Fair Play website?
Yes. It just seems like an odd thing for a Canadian lobbying group to be registered in Panama and hosted in the U.S. Just want to put that on the record. In the Fair Play's submissions to CRTC, they've stated that existing law can be used to order site blocking. If that's the case, why is there a request for law reform?
So there are existing legal remedies to combat piracy through potentially getting a blocking order from a court. We've found through experience that those are ineffective. Some of the reasons why they're ineffective is, generally speaking, piracy operators operate anonymously. They operate online. They operate outside outside of Canadian jurisdictions. So those factors combined make it very difficult to use traditional remedies to enforce a court order against a defendant that is essentially either unknown or unfindable. That's number one. Number two, under the Telecommunications Act, as you probably know, there's a specific provision, Section 36, which states that in order for an internet service provider, an ISP, to have a role in the dissemination of content that it carries, it needs authorization from the CRTC. So in a world where internet service providers are blocking egregious piracy sites, you need the permission of the CRTC. So from the Fair Play Coalition standpoint, we went to the CRTC with that application under a specific provision of the statute, and we're also saying that there are ways to perhaps improve the judicial process under the Copyright Act to affect a similar result, so that piracy can sort of be combated on both fronts.
Have Bell or Rogers attempted to get any of these orders to block sites?
We've certainly been to court against trying to get injunctions against those that sell the set-top boxes that disseminate this content. And my colleague may want to speak to how long and torturous that process is. But even when you can actually find a defendant in Canada and get proof that that person is engaging in illegal conduct, it's taken us, I think, 2 years to shut down one particular defendant in Montreal. So imagine how difficult it is to tackle an offshore defendant.
Mr. Watt, you had something to say?
Pardon me?
Mr. Watt, you wanted to jump in?
Well, I was going to say exactly that situation. I think it has received a fair amount of press coverage, and there have been various appeals and legal wranglings. It is shut down currently. However, we're still looking probably out a year before we actually go to trial in that particular case. And the current situation is simply too slow and too cumbersome. You have to effectively go and prove the case, and then you have to then ask for a remedy to that to the particular problem, which is the second step. We're proposing with the injunctive relief to have that upfront. You still have to make a prima facie case, and a strong one, that there is an issue with the content that's being distributed by this commercial entity. But that is really the only way that this type of theft is going to be able to be combated in a timely fashion, and it is a very significant issue today and a growing issue, and it's going to have serious ramifications for content creators around the world and content creators within Canada.
I might just add, just to put a couple of facts and figures around it, I think these kinds of site blocking remedies are available at common law in other countries as well, like the UK. But they've still passed law reform to make them injunctions directly available against the service providers. And I think the reason is that it's just not a practical solution for a rights holder to sue a website, successfully prosecute the entire case, try to enforce, fail to enforce, and then apply for a separate injunction only at that stage to get the site blocking order. When you think about how easy it is for someone to then open a new website, that creates an imbalance in the legal remedies available. And I think the Fair Play Coalition filed a legal opinion kind of indicating that the timeline and cost is something in excess of 2 years and in excess of $300,000 for one order under the current system. So I think what we're proposing is just something that's a little more streamlined.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the majority of countries that have these systems require a court order somewhere in the process. And I don't believe the submissions from Fair Play request a court order.
I think, well, there are a variety of regimes around the world. As Mark mentioned, I think there's 42 countries that have site blocking regimes of one form or another. Many of them do involve a court order. Others are administrative regimes. What we're proposing is an administrative regime through the CRTC under the Telecommunications Act, under an existing provision of that statute that would require us to go to them in any event. So that's why we're there, and it is a quasi-judicial process in which an independent regulator, not an ISP, is making the determination as to which site should be blocked or shouldn't be blocked. So it is a process that has all of the usual checks and balances that one would expect through a judicial process.
Okay, I have time for one last question. My question would be for all of you. What efforts have been made to identify the reasons behind piracy in the first place? It's very well to go after the pirate sites, but there's a consumer demand for it. And have we looked at, for example, the availability of Canadian content, which if you're looking at any media market in Canada, there's much less available here than in pretty much any Western country. And is that perhaps part of the problem?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in on that one. You actually don't have any more time left. Maybe we can come back to that question. We're going to move to Mr. Albus. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all of the witnesses for coming in and sharing the views of your organizations. I'd like to start with TechSavvy, Mr. Kaplan-Murth. Your presentation and that of the Canadian Network Operators Consortium, who came here to this committee last week, made it very clear that smaller ISPs, such as your own, do not support the enhanced anti-piracy measures proposed by some of the other witnesses here. So why do you think there's such a divide between the two positions?
Well, as I said by way of introduction, we are not rights holders, we're not media companies, we're just the internet service providers. You know, I think to the extent that businesses, or if internet service providers were very concerned about illegal content on our networks, we likely would not start, I think, with copyright. There is probably other more pressing illegal content on our networks that might concern us much more, that we may be talking about blocking or addressing in some way. The reason that we're talking about copyright is because the large ISPs in this country are, you know, mostly vertically integrated media companies as well, and they have interests on the media side.
Can you give us an example of the kind of things you think that we should be focused on versus some of the other concerns?
Well, I don't think that we should be focused on blocking other content because now we're running up against network neutrality and our common carriage rules. My point is, I mean, there is, you know, if we were going to look at illegal content, we would be talking about terrorism content or there are bad things out there, and we carry the bits, and we do that because we're common carriers, and we carry the bits without looking at them. Just like you can pick up a phone call, you can pick up the phone and speak to another person, and say whatever you want to say on that phone line, and that phone company won't cut off your call because of the words that you say. We will carry the bits. I think that the reason that the large ISPs are preoccupied with copyright in particular and website blocking to enforce copyright is because of their interests on their media sides.
So let's go to Rogers, Bell, or Shaw. The Canadian Network Operators Consortium, who TechSavvy is a member of, in their testimony last week, referred to large ISPs like yourselves as being vertically integrated. Can you please describe what they meant by the term in relation to your business?
Certainly, a vertically integrated company in our context is one that has owns content, and then as you go up, it is vertically integrated because that content is then distributed through the distribution arm, whether it be the wireless company or the cable company. So it's vertically integrated in that sense. It goes up the chain. It's not a horizontal integration of a different service. It is a service that you own that then is distributed by an entity that you also own as well. I will say, though, it is essentially a red herring, that vertical integration argument. We're here today as content owners, and we have every right to protect the content that we own. The CRTC in Canada has very strict rules, as Andy has mentioned, in terms of common carriage, net neutrality, and so there is no confusion in the sense that we are able to favor our content on our distribution arm. That's not the case. It is treated equally as people's content who do not have a distribution arm. So I don't really understand the argument. I can see the economic argument you're saying is possibly that you want to protect your content, you don't want that stolen, you want to have compensation for it. At the same time, when people are able to access the stolen content, they have less incentive to subscribe to your distribution arm. That's absolutely true. But in terms of content, we have to protect that, and we have a commercial interest in having people stay connected to our cable arms. But the country also has an interest in having them stay connected to our distribution arms. Rogers, in the terms of our cable distribution plant, contributes roughly just a little less than $500 million a year to the creation of Canadian content. People have focused on the 5% contribution to the media fund, the copyright payments that we make, but we also pay $500 million a year to Canadian programmers in affiliation fees. These are Discovery, TSN, Sportsnet, Much Music, Home and Garden TV. Of that $500 million, on average, 44% of every dollar of revenue of those programmers is spent on Canadian programming. So there's significant ramifications.
Well, I totally appreciate the observation, Mr. Watt. I think we're starting to move away because Ms. Rathwell said very clearly this is about copyright, and there are other regimes, and I think we're starting to tread into some others. But you did raise net neutrality specifically in previous applications that Fair Play and has put forward. The proposed site blocking plan, it said in its submission, would not violate net neutrality. However, don't the principles of net neutrality currently prevent companies like yourselves from removing or throttling the sites yourselves?
Yes, they do, but the key point to remember is that net neutrality is the free flow of legal content. We're discussing illegal content here. All legal content, there's equal treatment of the bits, but with respect to illegal content over the web, that type of content is not accorded the same rights.
Well, would not requesting a government body to have the power to instruct, let's say, an action to take something down, wouldn't that be precluded under net neutrality appear to be a backdoor violation, though?
I don't think in any way, shape, or form that would be a violation of net neutrality under a reasonable interpretation of what net neutrality is. As Mr. Watt said, and I think Minister Baines has said it himself, the concept of net neutrality is the free flow of legal content over the internet. So if a government body, for example, ordered someone to take down terrorist content, would that be a violation of net neutrality? I don't think anyone around this table would.
Well, I would agree with you on that, but again,
no, just let me finish. So if it can be proven that the content that's being disseminated on the internet is illegal, i.e. stolen, I don't think it's unreasonable for a content provider, regardless of whether they're vertically integrated or not. Quite frankly, this has nothing to do with vertical integration. It's about protecting Canada's cultural and content industries, which employs 630,000 Canadians and generate lots of legal revenue for the benefit of the country. So I don't think that in any way, shape, or form to
Thank you.
a
Sorry,
violation of net
we're
neutrality.
way over.
okay, thank you.
I'm sure we'll be able to come back to that. Mr. Massey, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. Mr. Kaplan, I appreciate your presentation, and a consistent mechanism is an obvious thing should be done, that this doesn't have to wait for this committee process to review something, send to the minister, and get back. It's a regulatory change that can take place, that should take place, and I can't understand why it's difficult to deal with. Now, I do want to deal, though, with an issue, though, that, the piracy has been brought to our attention again. I live in an area that has had over the years everything from on TV that came from the United States to smaller direct TV boxes that program cards used to be used. But I'd like to ask, they're obviously, Canadians are motivated to go to online privacy. Why do you, to Bell, Rogers, and Shaw, do you think that, including your own customers that you supply service to, are choosing piracy options even through your own feed streams versus that of actually using your other services that you actually offer? There needs to be a connection or a discussion about that, because especially Bell, you've noted 15% in your submission here. You're claiming it's nearly $1 billion in lost revenue. It's 500 to 650 million. What do you think it is that your own customers are not choosing your own services for and decide to go to piracy from?
Well, I'll start, and others may have comments. I think that some consumers have grown up in the age of the internet where content is widely available for free online, and they don't if they can access it, they don't give it a second thought as to whether they're accessing something that someone else owns the copyright in or not. It's available, they consume it. Oftentimes, critics of ours will say, well, if you made your Canadian content, for example, available at more reasonable prices, people would then consume it, and that's really, they lay it at our doorstep as that's the problem. And I'll give you a practical example. That's not the problem in our experience. There's a show called Letterkenny, which is a Canadian originally produced comedy, which is very popular. It's available on our over-the-top platform, Crave TV. I think all 4 seasons of it are available on Crave for a subscription price of $9.99 a month. And so if you want to consume Letterkenny legally, it's costing you less than 30 cents an episode to get it. So we are making Canadian content available online the way people want to consume it and at reasonable prices, and yet piracy continues to grow.
I've let quickly Shaw and Rogers maybe.
What Rob said, I think price is also a bit of a red herring. We offer various packages. We offer pick and pay. We've gone through a huge metamorphosis of our businesses over the last few years in terms of the way that we address consumers, and we're making huge investments in networks and advanced platforms for the reception of sort of advanced broadcasting services, as well as world-class infrastructure for internet. And so there is the issue of a segment of the population that just wants something for nothing. I go back to what we're producing, what we're competing with as a product that remains highly regulated, and notwithstanding that this is a copyright discussion, I echo the comments of all of the others at the table here, and it was in my opening remarks as well.
Okay.
What we do as a business is very intertwined with other policy objectives and sustaining the whole Canadian broadcasting system. So
I just want to get Mr. Watt in this, and also maybe you can start. I'd like to have a return answer on this with the remaining amount of time. Is how would you rank your companies with regards to the CRTC's decision on skinny packages? I take your points that you're making here, but I'd like to get you to comment on the public record as how you think your companies behaved with the introduction of the CRT skinny package to consumers. There is an emergence of an illegal market on piracy, as you've raised here today, and I think it's a dual relationship that's going on here. So I'd like to hear how you'd rank your rollout of the skinny package as well as the previous.
Well, for Rogers, I would rank our rollout of the skinny package as having been a success. We rolled it out on time as required. It is now the foundational package of all our cable TV packages. So we start with our starter package, $25 for Rogers. We included the 4+1 US signals in that $25 price point. It is the building block on which all our packages with higher tiers is built. There's demand for it. People take the narrow package. The problem is, though, even there, $25, and that's a bare bones cost. That might recover the cost, it might not. It's on the edge. But you're having to compete then against IP streaming services, and you'll see them out on street corners, $12.95 a month, 1,000 channels. And it's all content that has been stolen. It comes with, a 20-second lag over the original feed, and the quality of it might only be 90% of ours or so on. But that is very difficult to compete with. It is a price issue, and that's a problem that we face.
And if I could just add that I think the mind of the consumer needs to be borne in mind as well, because in many instances, these pirates are operating with such impunity so as to have storefronts available in shopping centers or kiosks in malls. Many times people don't even realize that they're not transacting with a legitimate BDU provider. And so I think that is part of this growing cultural adoption of this type of stream service, where it's not clear at all at times in the minds of the consumer that they're doing anything wrong.
And I think just as important, though, if we're using the documents that have been submitted here today, is if they're up to the percentages that are being talked about, those are your family members, your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers. So there's a motivational element here, and I don't know how much time I have. I got 2 minutes left, and maybe it's for later on for Bell and for at least get on the record, because that's what I'm looking for is roots for this. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Sheehan. You have 7 minutes.
Again, I just wanted to say I'll be sharing my time with Lloyd and Mr. Lametti as well. And I have just a very quick question for Andy. It's basically a yes or no answer. Should ISP providers be involved in some sort of remuneration for the content creator, the artists? We've heard testimony suggesting that there should be. Do you believe that ISP should be involved in some kind of tariff process?
I wish this were as simple as a yes or no answer. If I have to say yes or no, I will say no. I agree that from a policy perspective, it's a complicated question about the movement of content that was formerly broadcast onto the internet. And there are really interesting issues to explore there. From our perspective, we actually have a bit of a unique take on this particular issue as a wholesale-based provider. The sort of general argument, I think, is that internet service providers benefit from the increased number of users who come over to them and use their networks to get this content that might have been on TV before, or they might have gotten on TV before. That may be true for incumbents who build networks and have economies of scale as more users join their networks. Providing service to those users gets less expensive. That's not true for wholesale providers. We pay a fixed amount that's in tariffs for each user who joins our network.
I know you're unique, but I just want to get that kind of on the record right now, and we'll probably explore that a little more, but I just want to share my time with the other two.
Oh, okay, I understand.
Thanks. I want to build on that from the creator's point of view. We talk about balance, and yet the market isn't working for creators. We've had some solid testimony, and I've met with creators in Guelph, in my riding, that are saying that they're getting paid a fraction of what they used to be paid due to changes in technology. There are market changes for sure that are impacting. During the testimony this afternoon, we heard about the looking at the streaming services from pirated content. What about the streaming services from non-pirated content? Streaming services from Netflix or YouTube. If there's some type of a revenue opportunity through the ISP or through the vertical integration model, how could we look at this legislation to accommodate the new technologies around streaming services that would be more equitable, more fair for the creators? And I'm putting it out, maybe, Andy, if you could continue on, but let's share that question with the larger integrated companies as well.
This is, not really in TechSavvy's wheelhouse, as,
Okay.
It's a question about, but I'll kind of take a crack at it based on what I know about the area briefly. It's really a question when you look at those legitimate sites about the licensing fees that have been negotiated and what they pass on to artists ultimately, who you hear from, as well as when you talk about a site like YouTube, the enforcement that's on that site to try to prevent illegal content from being on it. YouTube is usually held up as having fairly robust systems to police that sort of thing. So maybe we would talk about some other site. But really what you're seeing when you look at those legal sites, I think, is a change in the balance of what those companies take and what they pass on to the artists. Right. And it's a bit of a different issue than sort of purely like a piracy issue.
Thanks. And Bella, I noticed just some body language around this. Maybe you could put some verbal language onto the table.
I was trying to think of an answer. That's
Okay.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head in today's day and age when our sort of regulated linear ecosystem, which has been around forever, is now being, some would say, overtaken, but certainly diluted by over-the-top providers. How do we find a way without sort of unduly constraining the availability of that over-the-top content? How do we find a way to sort of bring that into the system to the benefit of artists, creators, producers, broadcasters? Right. And that's certainly a live issue. I know in the government's launched a legislative review of the Telecom and Broadcasting Acts, and that's actually one of the specific questions they've asked. They've asked specifically, how do we get non-Canadian online providers to contribute to our system?
Right.
So many ways to do that. There's they could, for example, be required to contribute a percentage of their Canadian revenue to Canadian production. If you think about Netflix, and I think it's close to 7 million subscribers in Canada, doesn't pay sales tax in Canada, doesn't have employees in Canada, but it's taking a lot of revenue out of Canada. So, would it be wrong to ask them to somehow contribute to our system?
Right.
That's
and whether the carriers can participate in some type of collection model.
Yeah, that's, I think, where I just wanted to clarify from what Rob was saying. I think there's a lot of things to be explored about the role of over-the-top services per se within the system. And I also agree with Andy that to a large extent it's a matter of in terms of pure copyright, it's a matter of the contractual relationships that they're entering into. And I know that a lot of Canadian producers are very happy with their relationships with Netflix, and that's to the consternation of some of the Canadian media companies that are competing for rights. And I want to clarify, just for the record, that Shaw isn't a vertically integrated company when it comes to having media holdings. So I say that quite objectively. We have an affiliated company that's a separate public company that's Chorus, but we are a connectivity company. But getting back to your question about whether or not there's a role for the intermediaries in supporting the artists, or, I don't want to veer too far away, or Canadian content, I think from Shaw's perspective, it's very, very important to look at the genesis of the current exemptions in the common carrier idea that underlay ISPs, and that was established originally in the Railway Act, and that should continue because we're trying to build out advanced networks across this country, and saddling ISPs with those sorts of support mechanisms for artists, either in the context of copyright or broadcasting, is something that Shaw wouldn't support.
I missed the last 3 words. Would support or would not support?
Would not support. Sorry.
Thank you very much. We're going to run out of time. We're going to move to Mr. Lloyd. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for coming today. My first question will be for you, Mr. Kaplan Mirth. In Rogers' submission, they stated in the wake of the recent Supreme Court case that they think it should be a scheduled rate of $100 per IP address. And I just wanted to get your comment on the sense of scale of that. Like, what would that be to a smaller provider like TekSavvy? Like, what would be the cost of the $100 scheduled lookup per IP address?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know what went into deciding that particular rate for Rogers. That might be an appropriate rate for TekSavvy. Also, we may go back and look at it and see that it needs to be something else. We may be interested in exploring more the idea of a scheduled rate specifically for Norwich orders, which is what David was talking about, as opposed to the pass on notice and notice.
So you're saying that basically, like, Rogers' recommendation of $100, which is the fee that they kind of estimated as their own personal fee for a Norwich order, is not something that you view as financially burdensome to a company like TekSavvy?
Sorry, I think that the proposal, if I'm not mistaken, is that service providers would be able to charge a $100 rate for in order to respond to a Norwich order, in order to disclose the identity of an end user, when that end user is being sued by a content provider.
Okay.
So we would be charging that rate, and the question would be whether it's an appropriate rate.
So you're basically saying you don't think that rate is too low, that it would be financially burdensome to your company to do all those things for that rate?
I mean, we have not gone back and looked at what that would be. It strikes me as probably a reasonable rate, or in the right range.
Thank you. I'm also glad, that there seems to be a lot of unanimity on this committee about standardizing notice on notice. Is there anything that you think would be going too far if we were to go in that direction to recommend standardization? Is there something that would be too far that you think that we should not consider in terms of these recommendations on standardization?
I'm not sure what you mean by going too far. I think that standard form that uses code that we can process automatically, that includes the content that's required to be included, would satisfy all of the requirements.
Good. So it seems like there's agreement on that, which is something that we really get on this committee.
Can I add to that, if you don't mind, just quickly? Yes. You asked what might go too far. Certainly, we're a supporter of getting rid of settlement demands coming to consumers. That not appropriate should be written out of notices. But if you find yourself in a situation when you're sending a notice to someone that is illegally consuming a piece of Canadian content, for example, I'm not sure it would be such a bad thing from a public policy standpoint for the notice to say, A, you're consuming this content illegally, and B, there's another source of
Yeah.
legal consumption, and here it is. That, that might build, it sort of speaks to the questions you've been asking about.
Well, and and I'm glad that you spoke, because my next question is for you, Mr. Malcolmson. In your statement, you stated that you would like a technologically neutral model to go after, Copyright Act infringements. Would you say that the act as it's written right now is too specific, and that's the reason why, we haven't been able to deal with the problem of streaming?
Short answer is yes. I think the current provision speaks to copying, and so
right now,
streaming
they
is-
don't have the provision
streaming
to
is
deal with
arguably
streaming.
not caught.
Okay. So if we were to make it technologically neutral, you would recommend just basically wording that just makes it just cover everything?
Yes.
Okay. How much time do I have left? Okay. I guess, when we're talking about a criminal violation, organized copyright theft, like what sort of examples can you provide? Like what would be an example of organized copyright threat?
Sure. So I think the best example are the illegal IPTV, they call them, services that are sometimes being operated. And just to give you an example, these are people who set up 60 often fraudulently obtained TV receivers in basements across the country, upload all the channels to an illegal cable service, and then sell subscriptions to that service for like $10 a month, entirely comprised of stolen content, not $1 going to.
Is it realistic for the government to catch these people? Like, is there a realistic availability to?
It is. In fact, lots of them are being identified all the time by rights holders in the system, but it's sort of we don't have the remedies available now to address it.
Thank you.
If I could interject, that's exactly the intent of both the fair play application and the injunctive relief, that there would be an order to ISPs to block that IP address from which that stream is coming.
I hope I would get a follow-up, but.
That's
have time to come back.
the commercial entity that's doing it, not the end user. It's the person who has the server with that IP address on it to block that.
We're going to move on to Ms. Cesar Chavan. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses who are here today. A question to Mr. Watt. You indicated that you've watched the rise of streaming stolen content with deep concern. The remedies under the Act you mentioned are insufficient. You provided some recommendations for amendments. My question is in addition to amendments to the Act, what new tools and technology are available to help with dispelling your concern for streaming?
Well, in terms of the new tools and technologies, really, I think much of it exists today. This is the Sandvine analytics that allow us to identify the upstream, high upstream loaders. So as Mr. Graham mentioned, the question is, how do people obtain this content? And they will literally set up 60 set-top boxes, tune one to each channel, and then 24 hours a day stream it. So with the analytics, that is how we're actually, the new technology, able to identify those upstream streams that are sending traffic volumes, which really can only be when you are doing something of this nature.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else, Bell, or not tech savvy? Shaw? No.
I'm just thinking about those high upload sorts of streams. Service providers could cut off those users if they wanted to by publishing internet traffic management policies, for which there's a framework through the CRTC. They would have to establish those guidelines and then enforce them. They can already do that on their own networks, as far as I know. It wouldn't require, it's certainly not a copyright policy issue.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chain, I'm going to split my time with Mr. Lametti. One of the main arguments made by opponents to the safe harbors in the Act is a challenge to the dumb pipe theory. Sorry. Can you describe the extent to which ISPs can identify the content of data that they transmit?
I can answer that for tech-savvy. I would be very interested to hear it as well from carriers. It largely depends on the platform for us and what equipment we have in place. We can see whatever information the carriers give us. We're wholesale providers, and so we largely rely on the carriers for information about the actual connection that our end users have. So where that information is available to us, we would know the volume, like how many gigabytes a person has downloaded in a certain period of time. We could put equipment in place that would look into that content and find out what it is. We do not do that. So we have no visibility into the content of any end user traffic. And I mean, it goes further than that. It's not just content. It's what protocols on the internet they use. We just don't watch that or keep track of it. But there is equipment available, and we would be able to use that if we were interested in tracking that kind of information about our users.
Yes, there's deep packet inspection equipment that is available to provide insight into what is buried in the packets. But that's effectively we cannot use it to throttle or discriminate between the bits. It's really for informational purposes only.
30 seconds.
I've blanked as to whether Shaw is part of fair play, and I just want to ask generally about fair play. If, as you have said, you're going after the big sites that are using content, disputable content, why do we need a separate body in order to adjudicate that? We have the federal courts. Let's say we do something on injunctive relief, such that you could get an injunction. Why would we not use the federal court system, which has, I think, an impressive record on intellectual property and copyright generally, has expertise on intellectual property generally, and has a strong record of fairness with respect to IP? Why would we create another body? Let me flip it around. We have notice and notice in Canada precisely to avoid the abuses of notice and takedown in the American system. Why would we want to potentially open up a system that's potentially open to abuse when we could use our federal court system?
Actual time to answer that, but we will be able to come back to the next round. So ponder your thoughts on that one. We're going to move to Mr. Chong. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. It seems to me that this is a very similar problem that we have with all these illegal phone calls coming from CRA, or illegal phone calls purporting to come from CRA. We've got, last number of years, tens of thousands of Canadians have been harassed by these calls. Over $10 million has been stolen from Canadians because of this. And that there's really two ways to go about shutting this activity down. One is to block the phone numbers, or alternatively to shut down these call centers. I don't think blocking the phone numbers is a realistic way of going about it, because anybody can get a burner cell and get a new phone number pretty quickly to restart the scam. So shutting down these call centers is pretty important, and many of them are outside of the country in places like Mumbai and India. And so, I think that's the solution to it. So similarly, when we're looking at illegal set-top boxes or illegal streaming services, we can try to ban the sale of these illegal set-top boxes, but I don't think that's realistic. There's new technology, new hardware, new software coming along all the time. open platforms like Android, allow people to produce these programs. So I don't think that's the solution. So really, to me, it seems like the solution is to shut down these servers that are hosting this illegal streaming content. So I guess my first question is, where are most of these servers located? Are they in Canada or outside of Canada? I'll direct my questions to BCE.
So your analogy to call blocking and spam is apt.
So
It's
where are these servers
So
located?
the servers in terms of that are feeding illegal set-top boxes, as Dave said, some of them are located domestically, and where they have been located domestically, we've pursued a judicial remedy. The larger scale operations, I guess something like a Pirate Bay, for example, which is a well-known pirate stream available all over the world, they're located offshore. And that
Where?
I don't know exactly. Pirate Bay moves around because it's been in various
But
jurisdictions.
are there top 2 or 3 countries? Like with the call centers, we know that India has a huge problem. RCMP have been working with Indian law enforcement authorities to shut this down. But where are these streaming servers located?
My colleague may have some
Okay.
specific information for you, but the point is they are located offshore, and that makes it difficult to Mr. Lemeddy's question. It makes it difficult to use traditional judicial remedies to find that defendant and enforce against them on an expedited basis and an effective basis.
I was going to say, I think we should take that away and provide some information that's more precise about where we're seeing them commonly.
Okay. Now, I noticed in your second recommendation, I think it's your second recommendation, you're suggesting we increase public enforcement of copyright using domestic law enforcement agencies to actively pursue people who infringe on copyright. The government announced some $116 million for a new national cybercrime unit run by the RCMP that will work with international law enforcement agencies to pursue these kinds of infractions. Are you suggesting that that's not a good approach, or the government hasn't got that up and running yet, or another approach needs to be taken? We're here to hear your suggestions on this.
I think it's a good initiative. I think what we're saying is if that initiative makes commercial copyright infringement a priority, that's always been the issue, that sort of lower down on the enforcement food chain is copyright infringement. Given the scale it's grown to, and given who's engaged in it, organized crime in some instances, then this initiative would, if it made it a priority, would be a useful tool and consistent with our recommendation.
Okay. Well, it's I think there was a report this week in the news that the RCMP has fallen behind on the pursuit of digital crimes. It doesn't give us, at least me, great confidence that this issue is going to be dealt with expeditiously. And with 15% of all people now getting their stuff through these set-top boxes, these cloned Android or other cloned set-top boxes, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to catch up to this emerging trend. So it's all very concerning.
And to that, I just want to add that in order to engage the RCMP and to engage federal agencies, there has to be a very, very clear basis in law to do that. And we have spoken with the CBSA and the RCMP about this problem in particular. And what we hear back from them is that they're not always clear that the jurisdiction exists for them to engage in this particular type of problem, just on the mechanics involved in distribution and the like. So I think increased involvement by federal law enforcement is great, but it has to be buttressed by that criminal prohibition in the Copyright Act or in an act which makes it clear that they have the jurisdiction to investigate and to prosecute these crimes because they're against the law.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Jahari. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank to the witnesses. I want to pick up where some of my colleagues kind of went on the edge and left it there. It's about tracking the content or identifying the content. And I understand there's some technology available that you would be able to determine what the content is and the user, what type of content it's using. But I want to start by asking the following question. Are there any instances that the ISP providers are legally obliged to monitor their services for the type of content that's going to what you call your pipes? Andy, you could start. Go ahead.
No. I mean, there's no specific content that we're required to track or log.
Same answer.
Same answer. Shot, same answer. Okay. So given the fact that there is technology available, and can you give me a sense of how can that technology be used to be able to track, in the case of offshore, providers of the illegal content? And what is it that stop us from blocking them, or stopping you or your organization from blocking them? Because they wouldn't fall under our jurisdiction. Or am I simplifying this too much?
I think you're identifying the problem that we're confronting. As an ISP, we act as a carrier or a pipeline, and so for us to be able to do something about the content that rides along that pipe, we need some form of authorization. And so in
but do you
the
really
case,
need that authorization if they're offshore and they're not within our jurisdiction?
we would still need that authorization under the Telecommunications Act from the CRTC to essentially block that content. So if a pirate stream is coming from Romania, for example, and we could identify it and we just took it upon ourselves to block it, we would arguably be in breach of our common carrier requirements. So that's why we're in front of the CRTC saying, we know how to stop this, but we want to stop it with your authorization and through a proper process where we're not making the decision, because we're criticized if we don't want to be seen as censors, as some have painted the fair play application. So through proper authorization and independent body, they would say, okay, the content owner has proven its case that this content's being pirated from Romania, for example. Go ahead, ISP, and block it.
Okay, and that would shorten the time and the cost that you were talking about, because you were talking about $300,000 in about 2 years to be able to get. So how much of that will get shortened with the, with the suggestions that you have? I mean, anybody could.
I'll give you an example from our perspective. In our fair play application, we took a look at the costs of blocking through domain name servers, which is a common method of blocking, and it's infrastructure that is installed on every ISP system today. And the estimated cost to do a block of one site is something in the range of $18 to $36. Whereas, we spent 2 years, as Mark said.
We have a technology that we can identify the content, and based on the existing technology infrastructure that's there, it's going to cost us maximum $20 to be able to block, if we have the jurisdiction authorization that you're talking about.
For that type of blocking, yes.
For that type of blocking. David?
Well, I was just going to add as well, the reason for the desire for an order from the CRTC for the blocking would be that order would apply to all ISPs. Because if for example, to go back to the very start of the question, if one of us, if we felt we were authorized to do this, and we're not, but if we went rogue and blocked that IP address, people who wanted to consume it would just switch to a different ISP within Canada. So you do want it to be an actual order that would apply to all service providers.
Andy, you want to add something?
Yeah, there are various technical issues here, so without taking too long and going too far into the weeds, this is a great example of why people call this sort of regime a slippery slope. If we start down this road of requiring blocking, we're going to run into one problem after another where this is ineffective. DNS blocking is a way of basically taking a phone number out of the phone book. It's disassociating the IP address from the domain name. It does not block access to the website. It doesn't stop end users from using alternative DNS providers, which are provided by major companies, including Google. And many users use them because those DNS providers are sometimes faster than their own ISPs. So if we blocked using DNS blocking and removed those, then we're going to be back here 5 years from now talking about why we need to implement deep packet inspection. And then 5 years after that, we're going to be talking about why we need to block VPNs. And after that, you can bet users are going to find other ways to circumvent each of these ways of blocking it. What we need to do is protect the regime that we've had all along, which is common carriage. We carry the bits. We don't look at them. We don't judge them. We don't decide what to block.
I would, if I could just make 2 points there. One, where this regime has been put in place, there's been a 70 to 90% reduction. So we're not claiming that it's going to stop it all, but it has been effective in stopping the majority of the theft. And in terms of the slippery slope, we'd really like to deal with the issue today. That's all we can deal with. We need to deal with it first. If we then come to a subsequent problem, we'll have to deal with it then. But there's no reason not to deal with the first problem because you think a second one may come along.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, thank you. You're being quite liberal with my time, so.
Calling me a liberal. Thank you very much. Mr. Massey, you have your 2 minutes.
Thank you. I wanted Shaw and BC Bell to get a chance to respond to the skinny package thing, because I think I'm trying to understand and appreciate like kind of what's happening out there and what's motivating people. It's got to be a symbiotic relationship here of some sort. And what are the tools? You're suggesting that it may not be price driven, but I do want to hear from you in terms of your rollout from the skinny package and where you rank yourself in there. I've heard from Mr. Watt and his perceptions on that, and Rogers and Bell for the same, or sorry,
Thanks.
Shaw and Bell for the same thing.
Thanks. I don't want to rank ourselves in terms of vis-a-vis our colleagues. I think we've done very well with the rollout of Skinny, and I think our customers have responded. It suits some of their needs. Others want it's available, and it's the basis for all packages from which we build, and whether it goes to content packages or pick and pay from there. Our subscribers are happy with it. We think the price is reasonable. If we're talking about the attractiveness of free, I could turn for a second to an experience we had on the satellite side with a program called the Local Television Satellite Service. This was a benefit that we offered up to the CRTC to provide a package of free local signals to Canadians who had lost access to an over-the-air transmission because of the digital transition, and the transmitter hadn't been converted to digital. We offered it to a maximum of 33,000 people. 35,000 people or more subscribed. Many of those, because we were, there was no way to scientifically monitor who was taking it. A lot of the people clearly were taking it from their cottage. A lot of them were taking it from areas where there were local signals available. They just wanted it for free. And we continue to get calls that are beginning to kind of express concern about the fact that that program is time limited because it was for the duration of a license, which was, it's about 7 years is what it's been offered for. But, we're happy to have filled that stopgap, but it was illustrative to us that free is very attractive. So it's not a matter of a failure of our Skinny Basic offering or our services.
Thank you. Mr. Malcolmson or Mr. Graham, did you want to?
You will have time to come back. We'll come back to that. This takes us to the end of the first round. So we will have a second round. We'll be mindful of potential votes. So if we have to cut it short to go for the votes, we will. But we'll start our second round with Mr. Graham. That's fine if you want to give it to Mr. Lametti. You have 7 minutes.
I just want to pick up that question again, though. So why I think you have to justify why we can't use the court system, why we need another body. If in fact you're going after, as you're saying, the really popular sites, why do we need to have a separate body when the court system, the federal court system in particular, could work, looking at injunctive relief? You're not poor litigants. You have fairly good resources at your disposal. Why should we create another apparatus which would then be open to abuse, open to influence, perhaps by industry agencies like yourselves?
Maybe I'll start. I think you mentioned when you were asking a question, maybe we could do something on the injunction. I think what we've requested in our remarks today, an injunctive relief directly against intermediaries in the federal court, would be a significant help on this issue. I think the reasons we thought about the CRTC for the fair play application, there's a few. One is, I think the CRTC is often seen as more accessible for smaller litigants in particular, which might include creators and rights holders who can't as easily pursue something through a lengthy federal court process and are familiar with the CRTC. I think it's also more accessible for small ISPs who often appear before the CRTC and have expertise in that area. So I think that's one reason. And then the other reason is Section 36 of the Telecom Act, which says CRTC approval is required for a service provider to disable access to a piracy site. And in their view, the CRTC's view, that applies even if a court has ordered you to disable access. So if the situation is that you'd go to court and then have to have a duplicative proceeding at the CRTC anyways, and given that what we're talking about is the management of the country's telecommunications networks, and we have a regulator that's tasked with managing the regulation of those networks, it seemed appropriate to be there.
If I may, I would just add, we talked about, Dave gave an example and Mark gave an example of our collective attempt to shut down a pirate operating in Montreal, and it's been a 2-year saga. It's been lots of money in terms of legal fees, and it still isn't where it should be. The site blocking application creates an accessible channel for content owners of all stripes to go and protect their content. Imagine if you're a small content creator or owner and you have to go to the federal court and you have to spend 2 years litigating. You could spend on legal fees the amount of revenue that you're ever going to get from your show. So the idea, as Mark said, of putting it in the hands of the CRTC, when we're going to have to go there anyway under the Telecom Act, made a lot of sense from an accessibility standpoint and from a cost standpoint and from an efficiency standpoint.
Mr. Kaplan-Murr, do you have any thoughts on that?
Only, I guess, taking a step back, that I feel like there's a few different ways that we've talked about addressing that possibly illegal or infringing content, right? Going after the boxes themselves or the people distributing the boxes, or identifying where that content is being sort of captured off of a legitimate source and then uploaded onto the internet. Fair play gets at one part of that, really. It's blocking access to a site. So that would maybe choke off how end users using those boxes would connect to the uploaded streams. There are different ways of addressing this, and I think fair play creates a extremely powerful tool for a particular group within the CRTC, adjacent to the CRTC, would maintain this list that end users of sites that end users would then not have access to. I think that there are probably much less blunt ways to find the content that's being uploaded and use federal court processes to stop that, or choke it off in other places without creating such a powerful tool that I think is very ripe for misuse.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
Thanks. I have a whole lot of different questions in about 3 minutes to get through them all. So, what's that? Oh, I'll talk even faster. Jesus. If Rogers, you said you're here as a content owner, and I believe Bell would be here primarily as a content owner as well. So, of the large companies, who's here to defend the users of the internet as opposed to the content rights holders? And is there not a conflict between the two as a vertically integrated company?
If I may, I think the second half of our requests actually speak to us being here as an ISP as well. And Rogers was actually instrumental in driving forward the appeal, which was ultimately heard by the Supreme Court of Canada, which rendered a very favorable judgment, which I think TechSavvy would agree was quite consumer-friendly. And so from our perspective, we are a rights holder, of course, but we're also an ISP. And I think based on our recent Supreme Court experience, we actually have a very, very balanced view of how to manage these intricate issues as they relate to piracy, not just from a rights holder perspective, but insofar as the ISP obligations are concerned, and moving down the line, users.
And I think we're here in both capacities as well, and that's why you've seen our recommendations focus on the operators of the large commercial scale infringing piracy sites and not on any sorts of remedies that would impact end users. And I think enforcement against the illegal sites actually helps end users because those sites are a leading source of the distribution of malware. And also when people pirate the content, it increases costs to Canadians who access content through legal means. So we think it supports both constituencies.
Thanks. Reports indicated that Bell met with CRTC officials and pressured universities and colleges to support their application with regard to Fair Play Canada. Is that something that we should be concerned about?
Dialogue with regulators' staff before an application is filed, I think, is entirely appropriate and in fact should be encouraged because it creates open dialogue between a regulator, whether it's telecom or milk or bread, but it creates a dialogue so that both parties can be informed. Nothing inappropriate about that, and again, I think it should be
And for the universities and
encouraged.
colleges?
I think you said to me that Bell pressured universities and colleges. I would disagree with you entirely. Again, it's when someone's filing an application with the CRTC seeking support for those that think it's a good idea, it's perfectly appropriate to reach out to potential supporters and say, hey, do you think this is a good idea? And if you do, would you support this at the CRTC? All constituencies do that. So again, I think entirely appropriate and in fact should be encouraged.
Okay. I have a bunch more on net neutrality, but I think I'm out of time. So
You're out of time.
Thank you.
But thank you. Thank you for playing. We're going to move to Mr. Albus. You have 7 minutes.
Pick up on net neutrality for MP Graham. Just, again, I think it's, I disagree with this, but I think it's what many of you have done here today was very smart by saying, lumping your concerns in with illegal activity as in terms of a wider category. That may be categorically correct, but I think most people would hope that an RCMP officer, when he sees someone driving dangerously down the road, that he or she will immediately move to protect the public's interest versus stopping and saying, well, there's an illegally parked car to the side, and then go under a municipal bylaw while there's something that's obviously is a moving concern. So I think that you're obviously trying to protect the interests of your company, and that's totally noble. We need you to do that. But again, you're protecting the rights of your companies versus the wider interests and rights of everyone when we talk about public safety and whatnot. So with net neutrality, I will tolerate child pornography, terrorism recruitment, those kinds of sites being taken down as a point because it's practical and it must be done. On the flip side, when the government of Quebec tried to shake down ISPs outside of its jurisdiction to basically force gaming sites to come under their umbrella so they could collect more revenue, I disagreed with that. I think that you can't equate the two. So my question in regards to this is, you're asking for a quasi-judicial branch out of the CRTC to basically streamline your applications because you believe that it's illegal. Yet, when the RCMP or our security apparatus need to take something down, they have to go through a judicial process of approval, get warrants, etc., to have those things done. Why is it you think that your needs should be streamlined while those that are more subject to public concern, like terrorism and child pornography, have to go through a series of checks and balances where we know that there is judicial review? I'll start maybe with Bell, because you guys were had the last word on illegal.
Well, the proposal we filed, first of all, does contain a series of checks and balances so that the party that is subject to the potential blocking order has an opportunity to make representations. The party seeking the block has an opportunity to make representations. And ultimately, an independent body makes a recommendation to the CRTC, and the CRTC decides. Secondly, as we've said, I think a couple of times, that in order for an ISP to engage in blocking, they need the authorization of the CRTC. It's a statutory requirement. So that's why we're going there. We're going to end up there in any event. So we could go to court, and then we could go to the CRTC and have two different processes, but that seems to us to not be entirely efficient, again, especially for smaller content owners and providers.
So the Shaw application to the CRTC specifically referenced there's a lack of clarity as to what the federal court can rule on in this. Would that be an area that we could look at as a ways to have more oversight and clarity for your businesses, rather though than going to a model where it goes to the front of the line in these kinds of cases beyond those other cases of criminal activity?
Yeah, we discussed the need for clarification, and can let Jay speak to the particulars of how that might happen. Just to answer Mr. Lemeddy's question earlier, Shaw wasn't a member and isn't a member of the Fair Play Coalition, but we did file a supporting brief, and the reason, consistent with what Mr. Malcolmson has just said, is that we believe that it's a quasi-judicial body with a due process that's adequate to the task of dealing with this kind of content. But Jay can speak more to the particulars of the sort of amendment that would be in order to clarify the federal court jurisdiction.
So there's two things that could be done to help speed the process or make the process more efficient through the federal court, so using the federal court as a tool. The one is to clarify the court's powers to order the specific blocking of a URL or to de-index from a search engine to avoid the jurisdictional fight of whether or not that's actually within the wide ambit of injunctive relief that the federal court can grant. So make it explicit and specific and clear that this is within the federal court's powers, because the federal court sometimes is a little leery about granting injunctive relief, and you want to give them comfort that this is actually what Parliament intends. And the second thing, to the point that Bell raised, is right now you have a regime where even if the court orders all ISPs to block access to specific content, you then have to go to the CRTC and ask for permission to do what the court has told you to do. And there's no guarantee the CRTC is going to say yes. So that could put carriers in a position where they're either in breach of the Telecom Act or in contempt of court. And that can't be good public policy, no matter what you think of fair play or any other initiative. Surely the CRTC has to be told that it has to allow ISPs to satisfy an obligation pursuant to a court order. I mean, that just seems common sense.
Okay. So, and I appreciate that that intervention. That at least fills out some of my my interest in that. I'd like to go to TekSavvy. Mr. Kaplan-Murth, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So, do you feel that site blocking, or do you believe that site blocking suggestions are technically feasible? Eventually, if there's a clampdown, as you said earlier, users will change behaviors. For example, encryption, where there's not even going to be an ability for you to be able to identify that information that flows through. So did you think that's technically feasible if those kinds of techniques get used, where an ISP will have no way of knowing what content is being transferred through its lines?
Look, I don't think it's necessarily technically feasible for every ISP right now to do the kind of blocking that is already proposed, necessarily. I mean, it's fairly standard for, there was no description in the Fair Play application of what a site blocking is. We hear a fair amount about DNS blocking. So if that's what blocking is at this stage, DNS is fairly common for ISPs to provide, but it wouldn't be necessarily required. Presumably an ISP might configure all of their users' systems to go to a DNS server and then not have to maintain a DNS server. And there's no requirement to provide a DNS server, so presumably that ISP wouldn't be able to block it. If they had a requirement to block it, I guess that would require putting a DNS server in place, making their end users use it. I'm not sure if that's a possibility, and then blocking it. So that's just sort of the simplest case.
I got as part of Mr. Lametti's time was used up. Yeah, well, no, because she said I'd like to answer Mr. Lametti, so I would like just an extra minute, Mr. Chair.
You
So
will have
Mr.
time to come
Malcolmson-
back. Very quickly, please.
Okay.
But you will have
Mr.
one more
Malcolmson,
chance.
you also mentioned that on the standardization of notice, that you could say that the content is violation of a rights holder, but then you would then direct someone to the appropriate content. To me, that sounds very self-interested, given the vertical integration of your company. To be able to do that. Do you think that that's really in the public interest, or should that just simply be letting the person know, notice that that content is illegal?
I think it is in the public interest to, whenever there's an opportunity, let Canadians know that there are legal sources to the same type of content that they're consuming illegally, whether it's content from Bell or from Rogers or from Blue Ant or from CBC. You know, if I'm pirating Anne of Green Gables, it might be in the public interest for the consumer of Anne of Green Gables to know that it's also available on cbc.ca.
I think it's more probable that it would be Game of Thrones, right? But yeah.
Thank you. Can we move now? Can we move on? Thank you. Great. Mr. Massey, you have 7 minutes.
One of the reasons I was interested, and I saw the stuff on piracy that was presented, was really kind of important for us to have the discussion here today, is that we have heard from artists and creators, very explicitly, they're concerned about their future. And I'm not sure just even resolving that, obviously, is the silver bullet it is. And I'm going to, the area I represent, I have a place in between a bunch of stuff happening called Sandwichtown. It's the oldest European settlement west of Montreal in Canada. It's where the War of 1812 was fought. It's where Underground Railroad would taking place. Rum runners, a whole series of things. Today, though, it's challenged by economic poverty, the closure of schools, pollution. Has one of the highest rates of poverty. The reason I tell you all this is because I feel we have right next to it, I'm drawing a picture here, is the Ambassador Bridge. Now, the Ambassador Bridge is about $1 billion in activity per day. So about 35% of Canada's daily trade takes place in my riding. Private American citizen owns the Ambassador Bridge. It's right next to Sandwichtown. In fact, actually, they bought up houses, they knocked them down, they boarded them up. It's quite lucrative, though. Matty Maroon, who owns it, is in the top 40 American billionaires in the United States. And a lot of economic activity takes place right next door. Now we have, on the other side of Sandwichtown taking place, a new border crossing. I've been 20 years of my life spent on trying to get a new public crossing called the Gordie Howe Bridge. You might have heard of it. It's about $4 to $6 billion. Very little activity is taking place into Sandwichtown from this. There's supposed to be community benefits, but we don't even know how much. But essentially right now, it hasn't really done a whole lot for the area. We still wait. In front of that Sandwichtown is the Detroit River, and then we have what's called the Windsor Port Authority. The Windsor Port Authority is a multi-million-dollar operation that's doing quite well on its own, but also has this lucrative new border crossing that's going to be coming into place and has other extensive work. And if the Ambassador Bridge gets to be able to twin, as the government has provided them a permit to do so, will receive a major, major economic benefit from them. And then on the other side of Sandwichtown is a railway. There's a railway that goes to the Canadian Salt Mine and other operations. It's a multi-million-dollar operation. It's a smaller of the other. It's not CP, not CN, but it's doing okay, the Essex Terminal Railway. And in between all of this, what have people have gotten from multi-billions of dollars of activity around them is nothing. Closed schools, closed businesses, closure of the post office, highest rates of poverty. And I have to say that this is what it concerns me. And I feel the artists that we've heard from are in the same predicament. Do you have any suggestions whatsoever with the time that's remaining on what you can do other than just hoping royalties that will roll in if you stop piracy to help improve artists in Compensation Canada, even if it's not within your own jurisdictions of your own company? Is there anything that you can suggest to us, this committee, to do so? I fail to see just how ending piracy alone, or is there something new or different? And I'm open to suggestions. You may not want to answer it. I don't know, Mr. Chair, but it's the same thing that we've heard this from when we did our travel, and I see that we're still going the same thing. Is there anything that anybody here can offer for those individuals?
I actually used to go to school in Windsor and lived under the Ambassador Bridge and took my family there to see where I lived in college, and of course it was gone, so there's not much left there. But in terms of suggestions we would make, you know, as I said at the beginning, that cultural industries actually employ 630,000 Canadians and contribute 3% to our GDP. So they are playing their role in the employment of Canadians, and to the extent that piracy, if you agree with our perspective, is undermining that system, you know, certainly stopping piracy, constraining piracy, limiting it will help the existing ecosystem, which employs Canadians and creates jobs. So if I'm an artist creating content, if I'm the producer of Letterkenny, I certainly want to know that the government is trying to sort of stop the leakage of my intellectual property outside of Canada, and you know, that I'm getting fairly remunerated for what I've created. So I think stopping piracy, you know, isn't all about, you know, trying to help the vertically integrated companies. That's not it at all. It's about, you know, protecting those that create our content and making sure they're paid for it.
I guess I would just echo a remark I made earlier, and that is that Rogers, $900 million of its revenue was directed to Canadian content producers and creators.
I think that's consistent with the comments of Shaw. I think, just speaking at a very high level, there are a myriad sort of commercial relationships between artists and the different enterprises for whom they're producing content. And it's very, you know, at one level it appears very simple to advocate the introduction of a new right to add to artists' income. We had some discussions about the sound recording right and soundtracks, and it seemed like a simple fix. That's not really a simple fix. It would unsettle the broadcast industry in Canada and would have impacts on the broadcasting system to do that in terms of costs. There are also direct relationships between the artists in that case, for example, and the producers of the recordings that they're making. And so, you know, at a high level, it seems like there may be simple fixes in copyright by creating new rights, but when you drill down on it, as David says and as we said, there's a very sort of complex framework in place both at the public policy level and at the commercial level. And so, you know, from our perspective as a regulated broadcast distributor, we believe we make incredibly important contributions to the broadcasting system. As a telecom provider, we believe we meet public policy objectives, all of which come together to help Canadian artists. But unfortunately, copyright isn't a terrific mechanism from a national perspective to try to be, you know, executing domestic cultural policy.
Mr. Mass, I can actually give you a concrete proposal that tomorrow would put money into the hands of artists. Right now, under the Copyright Act, when radio stations play sound recordings or they're played in stores and restaurants, royalties are paid. And the Parliament has deemed in the Copyright Act that the money is split 50-50 between the record company and the performer. Give 75% to the performer, 25% to the record company. You've immediately improved the lot of every performer.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Longfield. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks for the time, and thanks to all the presenters today. You're giving us very concrete suggestions for our study. We haven't talked too much about the EU recent copyright legislation, and particularly around Article 13. And it was a controversy at the time, controversy through the summer, but it was looking at how do we grab content on the way up onto your systems, onto your platforms, content from the legal suppliers like YouTube and others, to make sure that copyright is being paid. So Article 13, have you reviewed that part of it? Is that something that we need to be looking at in terms of our legislative review? We are competing against the EU.
I'm not an expert on international copyright developments, but I think Jay has a lot of experience in this area, so I'll defer to him.
And I'm going to say I'm not an expert in international copyright development, but as Article 13, as I understand it, and it's not yet implemented, so there's still some negotiation that has to take place within the European structure. So we don't know what the final version is going to look like. But basically, it puts the onus on platforms that have user-generated content uploaded to them. So YouTube, Facebook. So it's not on the ISP level, it's on the platform level. And it says you need to have a system in place to try and prevent unauthorized uploads of content, which YouTube already has a very robust system of content match. Now, YouTube's problem is they say right now, if they find unauthorized content, they let the rights holder either take it down or monetize it. So they can say, you can keep the money or we'll take it down. And their complaint about EU Article 13 is it looks like it forces them to take it down and takes the monetization away. Canada doesn't have the same framework. We already have, so YouTube, if YouTube is engaged in communication of public, of copyright protected content for a commercial purpose, copyright in Canada applies. Royalties have to be paid, or if it's unauthorized, then it has to be taken down. So that it's not getting at the problem. This isn't going to put money in anyone else's hands. This isn't just a way of reducing the amount of unauthorized content available on the YouTube platform. But YouTube already does that. So it's a bit of a solution in search of a problem, and it doesn't really translate to what we're...
If I could, my thinking on this is the previous review 5 years ago tried to make this technology agnostic, and technology has changed. But what hasn't changed is the flow of information. How it flows is there would be different technology in 5 years' time from now. But to try and capture the value stream and get the revenue out of that value stream, it seemed to me like Article 13 was trying to do that. I'm not a lawyer, but some of you are. And I know that you've all had an interest in this, and it would be going into your platforms. So it could affect your business model.
I'm not sure that the way that the European model's proposed right now would go into an ISP's business model. It's targeted at, platforms, so not hosting, we don't take the uploads and then host them somewhere in a way that we could take them down. Instead, we're just kind of moving the bits from one place to another. I would echo what Jay said, that I don't think that the Canadian framework needs an approach like that. Copyright applies to the content that's on those services that are doing business in Canada already.
Okay, over to Terry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we've covered a lot today, and I thank you for that testimony on a variety of subjects. One of the subjects we haven't touched on, but we heard in different parts of the country when we traveled, we've heard different testimony on, and it goes to what Robert said, that some people just don't think that pirating is, what they're doing is wrong. They're not educated. And there's a bunch of institutions, a lot different groups that are educating people about the infringement of copyright through piracy. So my question to you, is your group, are your companies able to or are doing educational programming out, large companies with access to a lot of people? Don't spam them. We went through a whole bunch of testimony on that. But no, but seriously, you do have different ways of communicating out there to the people. The government has a role to play in that. But I think, it's just like anything, whether it's seatbelt, drinking and driving, or texting, there's a certain amount of education that needs to happen with the people. So I'll start with Robert.
Yeah, I think you're right that education is a key component of making sure consumers understand the implications to the cultural industries of consuming illegal content. And certainly I think we could collectively do a better job of educating Canadian consumers. And when I suggested in the notice and notice regime that perhaps in a copyright infringement notice that's going to a Canadian that is consuming perhaps unwittingly copyright infringing content, if it made that Canadian citizen aware that there was another source, a legal source to get that content that supports our domestic ecosystem, that's a very sort of personal and effective way of educating that particular consumer. So that is one way it could be done.
Sorry, we're gonna.
Out of time?
Yeah, we're way out of time. Mr. Albus, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually going to.
Oh,
Is it supposed to be?
no. Oh, that's the names that are on
Did
here.
you want to go through? Okay. So it's 5 minutes, correct, Mr. Chair? Okay, thank you.
Kidding, go ahead.
So, I actually would like to follow up with Mr. Sheehan just in regards to the education side. While I'd actually like to focus on whether or not your companies, respectively, on some of these new box technologies that are coming out, are you spending time with the RCMP so that they understand what is illegal, what to look for, so that there can be national bulletins? Are you working with different associations for police to be able to, so that they're advised that this is an issue?
Yeah, so we actually met early on with the RCMP and the CBSA. We've gone back to the RCMP. Where I think they do have a role to play is where we see the unlawful decryption of satellite signals, because there's a very clear prohibition in the Radio Communication Act, which says you cannot decrypt a satellite signal. So to the extent that that type of activity is occurring to help fund and fuel this industry, this unlawful industry, yes, I think there's a role to play. But what we also know is that that is not the only means by which this content is being acquired. And so I think in part what you see before you in our submissions is, we're asking for modern provisions which address what is actually occurring. We heard a little bit about this sort of set-top box organized element, really, which is the large-scale redistribution of content, none of which is authorized. And so that, I would submit, is not an area where the RCMP can be helpful, because there's no clear prohibition that we can point to in either the Criminal Code or the Copyright Act, which would allow them to take jurisdiction to open an investigation, even if they wanted to. Okay. And I don't know if Mark or Rob have anything to add. We have met with the police, and we're still here.
I think that's very helpful, because there was earlier Mr. Watt had mentioned the criminal code needing to be updated. So I wanted some specifics. Mr. Malcolmson, do you wanted to jump in?
Well, you asked what we've been doing in terms of educating enforcement agencies. We've worked for the last year and a half with the CBSA to help them understand the number of set-top boxes that are being imported into Canada every day, because most of them are made outside of the country and they're brought in over the border. So we've pointed out to them that these imports are happening and they might want to look at them and take enforcement action, and that's an ongoing battle for us to get their attention, but hopefully we will. We've also talked to ISED about the boxes coming into the country and not being certified under the Radio Communication Act, because there are spectrum issues around these boxes, and pointed out that they're not compliant with the Radio Communication Act. And again, we're continuing to fight that fight and educate enforcement agencies that have the ability to do something.
Mr. Kaplan-Murth, you had mentioned earlier that on the notice-on-notice regime, when sometimes personal information will be sent on that may violate someone's privacy, and that there's that you'd like to see those things removed by a more standardized form that wouldn't allow that information to come to you in the first place. Is it because you're worried about liability if you put notice on notice and inadvertently give information about someone to someone else? Is that what the erroneous information you're talking about?
Sorry, there may have just been some confusion about that. I think I said, I was asked if I would provide samples of the notices that we receive, and I'd said that there's some personal information in those notices, so we may redact that before we provide it to the
Oh, no, I'm not talking about
committee.
no, but you said that sometimes you'll receive information that when you forward it to someone on notice that is extraneous to the requirements, and
right.
that you could be liable for it. Is that what the concern is?
So it's not that we're necessarily liable for it in any way, since we're required by law to pass it on. The problem, so the sort of thing that I'm talking about here is personalized links that appear in those notices. So the notice we receive will say to the end user, click here to confirm that you received this notice. And then it'll have a link, and it's not just a link to a website, it's a link with variables, tags that identify which notice it was. And what that means is when the end user gets that notice and clicks the link, now the sender has the IP address and other information about the person's computer and browser that they can associate with that notice. They have information about the individual that they didn't have before. So by passing that on, we're making our end users vulnerable in a way that doesn't feel like it serves the purposes of the notice and notice regime. The end user, in turn, gets that message from TextSavvy or from the ISP, not from the rights holder. And we write some information as sort of an envelope around the notice that explains to the user that this is not from us. We are just passing it on. We're required to pass it on, all of that sort of information. But then we have to provide the notice as it's given to us, including advertising for potentially a competitor to us. That puts us in a difficult position, and it's completely extraneous information. Thanks.
Thank you very much. For the last question, Mr. Graham, you have a hard 2 minutes. That's it.
It'll be an easy 2 minutes. Thank you. Mr. Keir-Wilson, I want to follow up on a comment you made earlier that the CRTC may not be inclined to follow a court order. Can I ask you to confirm that your position is that the CRTC would not be inclined to follow a court order?
Sure. So the CRTC actually issued a ruling, and it was the case that was referred to earlier where the Quebec government had sought to require people to block access to gambling sites. So the CRTC is very clear, and it's spelled out that even where there's a municipal order or a court order or some other judicial order, its approval is still required. And it said that in deciding whether it will approve, it will look at Telecom Act objectives, which don't necessarily coincide with Copyright Act objectives or criminal code objectives. So this is the CRTC has said this. I'm not sort of assuming this is the case. The CRTC has been very explicit about this.
Okay.
And if I could just jump in, perhaps ironically, the CRTC made that finding partly at the behest of large ISPs who at that time did not want to block gambling sites in Quebec and asked the CRTC to step in to assert its jurisdiction in that situation.
Okay.
That's it, 2 minutes.
2 minutes are up? Man.
2 minutes.
Thank you, guys.
Time. On that note, I want to thank our guests for coming in today. It's been a lot of information. I don't envy our analysts. They have a lot of stuff to go through. That's why we have so many of them. We spared no expense. Thank you all very much for coming, and we are adjourned.